Hi, this is Steve with Knee Family Lights again. If you've watched other how-to or behind-the-scenes videos of mine, welcome back. If not, I hope you find this informative. If you do, please be sure to explore other videos in the how-to and behind-the-scenes playlist of this channel. I plan to continue making videos covering various topics, so click the like and subscribe buttons if you find them helpful, and let me know in the comments. In this video, I walk through how to plan and set up a high-density pixel prop, specifically the Gilbert Engineering Rosa Wreath. The planning, calculations, and setup for this prop would work for any high-definition prop, matrix, megatree, etc. Which is better, 12 volts or 5 volt pixels? It doesn't matter. Do I need f-amps? Maybe. Should I use a dedicated controller? Not necessarily. Which one would be better, a Falcon or a Culp controller? Either one would work just fine. So, let's get right into it. The high-definition props are amazing for all the different shapes, curves, and submodels. The challenge is the number of pixels per prop is demanding on your controllers and your power requirements. In this video, I show how I set up the Gilbert Engineering Rosa Wreath. This is not a paid advertisement. Also, you could use the same analysis for any other high-definition prop or high-density prop. And in xLights, here's the layout of my home. If you want to drop in the Rosa Wreath prop, all I did was hit the down arrow, dragged an area, go to Gilbert Engineering, find your wreaths, pick your Rosa Wreath, and then click Insert Model, and it will drop it in. Here I've highlighted the Rosa Wreath, and you can see that it comes with a bunch of submodels already. Outer ring, bunch of rings, bunch of arrows, bunch of spokes, wavy outline, and outer balls, and ribbons. I also submodeled for left, middle, and right section. That might have already been there, and all these feathers. One thing you will want to do is create some groups. So what I have up here are groups for the Rosa Wreath: all, arrows, balls, feathers, feathers even, feathers odd, outer ring and ribbons, ribbons, rings, spokes, wavy outline. Like all high-density props, this one has a lot at 696 pixels. That's going to be a challenge to run with one output, but let's first take a look and review the different controllers and options to see what could work for a high-density prop like this. Next, we review controller specifications. If you're very familiar with your controller and want to skip to the next section, go to the controller output and power calculation section of this video. On to the controller specs. For planning purposes, whether using a new controller or expanding the use of an existing controller, you need to determine the best setup for your situation. You need to take into account the controller type, the number of pixels per output that will be used, which affects the frame rate performance, power and power injection requirements, and the potential need for f-amps, which is driven by the distance of the prop from the controller and the number of pixels per output, even if you are power injecting. The Falcon and Culp controllers provide the best value and are the most common, so we'll briefly review those controllers. Let's take a look at the Falcon pixel controller specifications. A link to this document is in the description below. The Falcon F16V3 with no expansion boards can support up to 680 pixels per output at 40 frames per second. It can also support up to 1024 pixels per output, but you're limited to 28 frames per second. Falcon boards with expansion cards, which is what I'm using, supports up to 40 frames per second up to 680 pixels per output, and 28 frames per second if you're running above that up to 1022 pixels per output. If you're using one expansion card, people typically divide the outputs in half, so you'll have 512 pixels per output supporting 40 frames per second. If you're using two expansion cards, you'll likely start with the outputs divided in thirds, so you'll have about 340 or 341 pixels or so per output that can be adjusted and maintain 40 frames per second. Now let's take a look at the Culp boards. I have here the F8 PB controller, owner's manual. Also have the F8B controller manual, the K16AB on their Culp website, and the Culp K32AB. In this case, if you go to these manuals and search up "40 frames per second, you'll see that for the Culp 8s, it can support up to 750 pixels at 40 frames per second. Same thing is true for the K16AB. Here we have 800 pixels at 40 frames per second and 1500 pixels at 20 frames per second. And for the 32AB, it can support 800 pixels at 40 frames per second. In this section, we'll walk through calculations for the Rosa Wreath using 1 up to 4 data outputs, and you can use more if you want. These theoretical calculations determine the power draw in amps per setup, the need for power injection and how many to use, the likely need for F-amps, and the number of set of wires required to run the prop. I'm assuming all lines or sets of wires from the controller to the prop are 3-core 18-gauge extension wires. You could use other wiring if you'd like and can adjust power limits. It's up to you, but for most people, standard 18-gauge 3-core pixel extension wiring is assumed here. You should always plan to have some buffer in your calculations to promote reliability and longevity of the pixels, power supplies, etc. A good rule of thumb is not to overtax your power supplies and fuse limits, keeping at least 25 to 30% of its output capacity as a buffer to prevent overheating or failure. For example, leave 105 watts of a 350 watt power supply in reserve. So only plan to use up to 245 watts, about 70% of any given 350 watt power supply. I won't go in depth about what happens when you overtax your equipment in this video, but it's something to take into account since you'll likely be using your controllers and power supplies to support much more than a single high density prop. Okay, here we are in Excel looking at calculations for the Rosa Wreath prop. I'm using 12 volt pixels using 55.55 watts per pixel on full white, and I have reference data here for 5 volts and its power usage at full white as well that can be used. We'll take a look at those briefly towards the end so you can see the difference, which is primarily higher current requiring more power injections. If you're using 5 volts, you can change the pixel values and extend the formulas to see what works for you. Typical shows are set to 30% brightness like mine, so that'll be the target in these calculations. However, I do show the calculations at every 10% brightness step from 10 to 60. Given the density of these props, it's likely you'll want to run the same brightness or lower than the rest of your lights. Here we are taking a look at if we were just to use one output from a controller. This can be done if you are running at 10% only, drawing 3.19 amps. If you're trying to run higher at 20, 30, 40 or above, you're going to need to do some power injection. I show here one power injection line is safe at 20%, marginal at 30%. 2 power injection lines is safe up to 40%, and 3 power injection lines are safe up to a bit marginal at 60%. With 696 pixels on a single output, you're pretty quickly going to find out that you'll probably need 2 or more F-amps to maintain data integrity throughout the prop. Assuming you want to run the prop at 30% brightness, I would personally go with 2 power injection lines, with each line including the output drawing 3.19 amps. On the right here, you'll see the number of wires per prop. If you're only doing 10% with one output, you need 1 wire set up to the prop, 1 additional power injection, 2. My recommendation is 2 power injections if you're using 1 output, which you'll need 3 wires going to the prop. In addition, there are controller frame rate limitations as reviewed in the controllers section. Even though the Falcon F16 V3 and the F48 can support more than 680 pixels per output, anything over 680 pixels will limit the frame rate to 28 frames per second. Likewise, the Culp boards, all of them, can support 40 frames per second for this prop, running at 696 pixels, because it can handle up to 800 pixels per output at 40 frames per second. If you're running one data output, it cannot be done with an F16 V2 of any type or an F4 of any type, because those are limited to 680 pixels per output. Back to the Falcon controllers, be mindful of the Falcon F16 V3 and F48 division of pixels per output. If you're using an F16 V3 with one expansion board, which divides the available use of pixels per output, it starts about half at 512 per output. With two expansion boards, you'll start out with about 340 pixels per output of 1/3. Sliders let you adjust this, gives you some flexibility in your display, but you want to be mindful for other props that you're using and how many pixels it needs per output. Okay, let's take a look at running the prop with two outputs. So now we're looking at 348 pixels per output. Running the prop at 10 or 20% brightness, you should have no issue with needing to run any kind of power injection. At 30% brightness, you're starting to get at the margin level of the 5 amp fuse, which I would recommend if you're doing 30%, you're going to want to do at least one power injection, which brings your power per output and power injection line to 2.39 amps. Mind you, this is one power injection for each output, so we're really adding two power injection lines. So on the far right here we see if we're running just two outputs at lower percentage outputs brightnesses, we've got two lines, and if you're adding a power injection, which I would recommend at 30%, assuming that's what you're going to do it at, you're looking at running 4 lines or wires to the prop. Regarding controller limits, all Falcon and Culp controllers can handle the 348 pixels per output at 40 frames per second, which is well below the 680 pixels per output limit of the Falcon controllers. For a Falcon F16 with two expansion boards or a Falcon F48, you will need to adjust the output per group by a little bit, since it defaults to 340 or 341 pixels per output, and move that up so you can accommodate 348 pixels for these outputs. Last, with 348 pixels per output, 2 or more f-amps may be needed to maintain data signal integrity if your controller is more than 30 feet from the prop, or if your extensions are more than 30 feet. Anything under 30 feet you'll probably be fine without having to need any f-amps. Alright, so let's take a look at 3 outputs. That comes to 232 pixels per output. Now we can confidently run with no need for power injection at 30% typical, or even at 40%. If you're going to run at 50 or higher, then you're definitely going to need some power injection, of which when I say one power injection, again it's 1 per output, so you're adding 3 total additional power injection lines, up to 6. But it can be done with 3, as highlighted here, which is less than the 4 using just 2 outputs, interestingly. Again, the Culp and the Falcon boards can support the 40 frames per second with 232 pixels, and depending on how far your prop is from your controller, you may need 3 f-amps coming out from the outputs. If 3 outputs is good, wouldn't 4 be better? So let's take a look. Now we're looking at 174 pixels per output, running at 30%. Each output is only drawing 2.39 amps, and you can run all the way up to 60% and be still okay. In this case, there's really no need to power inject, but you would possibly need to if you're running anything over 60% or higher. Again, no issues with frame rate. And last, depending on how far your controller is from the prop, if you're over 30 feet, you may need 4 f-amps. With 4 outputs, you are running 4 sets of wires to the prop. So let's take a look at a summary. With 12 volt pixels using typical show setups of 30% brightness, here are some viable options. You can use one output with 2 power injections. You're looking at 696 all the pixels on one output. You're going to be drawing 3 lines to the prop. You will be limited based upon the type of controller you have to potentially be down to 28 frames per second instead of 40, and there's a high likelihood of needing f-amps. If you have 2 outputs with 2 power injections, that's also an option. You're looking at 348 pixels per output, drawing 4 lines to the prop. All the Falcon and Culp controllers can handle 40 frames per second, and depending on the distance between your controller and your extension line to your prop, you may need 2 f-amps. With 3 outputs, you will not need any power injection, and you'll use 232 pixels per output. You'll be bringing 3 wire sets to the prop. You'll have no issues with 40 frames per second, and depending on how long your extension wire is, you may not need f-amps. If you're running 4 outputs with no power injection, you have 174 pixels per output. You'll have 4 sets of wires going to the prop. Again, no issues with 40 frames per second. And again, depending on how far you are in your extension wire, you may need 4 f-amps if you're more than 30 or 40 feet or so. Reviewing this data, I personally chose to go with 3 outputs with no power injection. That's not to say other ways of doing it's wrong, it's just what I chose to do based on these numbers and the fact that I had 3 available outputs on my existing and only F16 V3 used to run my show. Note, the entire NE Family Lights show runs off of a single F16 V3 with 1 differential expansion board. 2 diff receivers run under my megatree, 1 diff receiver is in the yard that runs the arches and mini trees, and 1 diff receiver runs to the portico, which runs the porch lights in the right side of my house. See my 2018 behind the scenes video to see where I placed those 4 controller boxes. Now let's take a look at the wiring of the Rosa Wreath. Back to xLights. In xLights you can go to Model here, click on Model Data, click to edit the 3 ellipses. You can then copy and paste all the cells of this view into Excel so that way you can use it to reference your pixels when you're pushing them. Note that in the grid view here, what you're looking at is the front of the pixels for the numbering. If you click the wiring view and see this part, this is the back. So if you're looking at the back view with the pixel node numbers, you want to make sure when you wire it that this is the back side. Since I decided to go with 3 outputs, the first output will control pixels 1 to 232. The second output controls pixel 233 to 464, and the third output controls pixels 465 to 696. Let's switch to look at some pictures I took of the wiring. Okay, so here we're looking at a picture I took of the back of the Rosa Wreath when I was doing all the wiring. You'll see that at the bottom I have the 3 pigtails coming in. It's labeled with blue painter's tape, 1, 2, and 3. I did take those off and put on proper labels. And you'll see from the middle one it goes up through the middle and comes right here to pixel number 1. So circle that. And that then finishes with pixel number 252. That's right here. So that's the first input. I'm going to remove these circles for now. Zoom in again. If you look very closely, you'll see that there's extra wires going from this first pixel to pixel 232, and that's what I am referring to as self-power injection. Wow, that really zoomed in quickly. Okay, so there's a green wire and a white wire. What I did was I'm using the Monoprice 4-core 100% pure copper 18 gauge speaker wire, which is really good stuff. You can definitely tell that's pure copper when you cut into it. I basically took 2 wires out of that 4-wire bundle to make these power injection links. So you'll see here I'm going from pixel number 1. I'm going to draw on top of the power injection wires over to the end here, which goes into pixel number 232. At the end of that 232, the data line is cut and kind of capped off, and that would be the end of the first output, and it doesn't go any farther, it doesn't connect to anything else. If you look closely here, you'll also see from pixel 1 all the way up to the middle, pixel 116. I've got another wire, and I'll try to trace it here. And that splices into, if you look closely, the 12-volt line and also the ground volt line. So what this does is it self-power injection basically levels the power out. You don't necessarily need to do the middle at 116. It would be totally fine to just do the beginning and end. I just figured since I was here and I'm doing the wiring anyway, I might as well just make sure this thing is going to be rock solid, run an extra self-power injection to 116. From the calculations, we know that the 232 pixels have plenty of power. Is it required to do this self-power injection? Not really. I do it because I know it balances out the power of voltage sag, and it also helps significantly with the ground line for data integrity. Now let's look at output number 2. It comes in also from the bottom, and it starts right here at pixel 233. What's nice is in this prop, the last of the 232 for this group is pixel 464. You can see that right here. And right in the middle is 348, which is right here. Now I'll remove those, and you can see that I've got the power injection, self-power injection lines that go from the first pixel here at 232 where it comes in. I'll trace it. It comes up here and goes around, connects right there. And the second self-power injection wires also goes from the first pixel. See if I can trace it here, down and to the end. And you can see that the data line is clipped, cut, and wrapped right here. Now let's take a look at the third line. Very much like the second line, it's coming in from the bottom. It starts right here at 465. And I am going to move up and do my best to draw the self-power injection lines. It's going here, got it wrapping all the way around. Get up to the top here to pixel number 580, which is right up here. So we were to continue to draw that line to here. And then since we're at the top, the last pixel is 696, which is over here. I continued on from 580 and ran around and connected right in here since it was much shorter than starting from the bottom and going back up and around again. Now the moment of truth. Does it work? As I mentioned earlier, my Falcon controller is on the roof of my garage. The Rosa Wreath is far enough away that I'm using 40-foot extension cables. I plan to use 3 outputs, so we'll see how well it works. At 40 feet, it's right on the margin of the data being corrupted, so we may or may not need f-amps, and we'll see. Here I am testing out the first input. This test is using my little tester controller with a single pixel, so I know what it's doing. The tester's output is set to 28.6% to best approximate the 30% brightness of the show. You can always pull out the controller you're going to use, but I prefer to use a small test setup for testing props so I'm not dragging the ammo box or the Falcon controller all over the place. So the pixel following the little tester won't have as strong of a signal as the Falcon, so I know if it works with this test setup, it'll for sure work with the Falcon. The 40-foot extension cable I'm using and testing here is one that I made using the Monoprice 4-core 18-gauge pure copper speaker wire. 2 of the wires are connected together for the ground, one is used for 12 volts, and one is used for the data line. As you can see as I'm scrolling through the colors here, the first 232 pixels look fine without the use of an f-amp. Here is the same setup. Instead, this time I've added a microamp, which is essentially the same as an f-amp. The microamp was something I purchased before David Pitts created the f-amp. The quality of the Monoprice extension cable I made is fine. I'm really testing out the microamp because I'm planning to use them on all 3 extension cables. You'll see why in the next series of videos testing the other 2 inputs. Okay, here I am testing out the second input, nodes 233 and 464 of the prop. I'm in front of my house as my Halloween show just ended. I'm reusing the 2 extension wires from the Ghost Be Gone prop. I've got the same test setup. This extension wire is also 40 foot in length. However, this extension is made up of solid core Cat5e exterior grade wire. The internal wiring for this cable is 4 wires are connected together for ground, 3 for the 12 volt line, and 1 data line, and 1 wire is used for the data line. As you can see, data is not able to cleanly make its way to the prop. Here's the same setup for the second input. This time I inserted the microamp or an f-amp. With the 40-foot Cat5e cable and the f-amp, the data signal is much better. The phone recording makes it look like the pixels are flickering, but they aren't. it has to be the refresh rate of the pixel tester being slower than the camera. Last and not least, here I am testing out the third input, nodes 465 through 696 of the prop. Again, it's the same test setup, and like the other test for the second input, the extension wire is also 40 foot in length, made of the same Cat5e cable. And like the second input, data is not working right. So, one more microamp or F amp. I ran the test, and it looked good, just like input number 2. If my controller was close enough to use 30 foot extension wiring or shorter, it's very likely that no F amps would have been needed. Even though the first input didn't need it with the monoprice cable, I went ahead and used 3 F amps or microamps with my Rosa Wreath setup. Okay, so now you've got your plan put together, you've got your prop wired, it's tested, it works. Now it's time to figure out how to mount it to your house. In my case, I had a lot of leftover PVC, so I made a frame out of 1/2-inch PVC pipes, it's 4 primarily, and a bunch of 90-degree angles and T's. So let's take a look at it. Got the Rosa Wreath here, which is significantly heavier than what I had as a wreath. And it's going to be hanging off off the front of my house, but I do have a portico, little porch thing right below it. So my plan is to make this little stand that will be zip tied to the back of the Rosa Wreath, and then the bottom of the stand I can put different lengths of 3/4 inch PVC to be legs. So most of the weight will just go straight down on the legs, and then I'll just use some fishing line to hold the corners up against the house. Okay, if I stick it on the back here, there are a number of places where there's some flat open areas. So here's the top, and the plan is to do one zip tie here, one zip tie here, a third one here, and a fourth one behind there. So there'll be 4 in each corner, and that should be enough to hold this thing together. In my case, this prop is in front of a window. The previous wreath prop was much lighter and could be suspended via fishing wire from the wooden shutters. So you can see the fishing line going up, to screw up there, fishing line on this side, to screw on that side. On the back, it's just hooking around the PVC frame. Looking down at the bottom of the wreath, you can see that I've got these 3/4 inch pipes that are going into the bushings, shown earlier. My portico roof is uneven, so the left leg is shorter than the right leg. These are not glued into place, so you can see it's just slipped in there. And the nice thing is I have another short leg. I can pull that one out, put this one in, and it can stand level on my floor for storage. If you're still here, thanks for watching. I hope your planning and builds go well. Till next time, see ya.